Imagine yourself in this scenario. You live in a large house. But this is not just any house, it was once a hospital. In the past, many lives were lost here, and countless abortions were performed. Women often died with their babies. It was a place of extreme horrors. After these dark times, you and your family move into this former hospital. The experiences you go through in this house are genuinely harrowing. Coming from a peaceful family, you decide to move into this hospital, and your family's problems begin to escalate. The family starts to crumble, with everyone growing distant from each other. The story you will hear today is 100% true. I ask you to like, leave a nice comment, and share so that others who don't know about the channel can discover it. With your support, we can reach more people, God willing. Now, let's change the names to maintain privacy. My name is Sarah, and I am 35 years old. At this age, most women my age are married with children, but my situation is different. I am not married because things have been difficult for me. In this story, you will understand why I remain unmarried. I live with my mother, father, and siblings. I have a younger brother and another one who is older. My mother's name is Emma. She is a kind woman who has always taken good care of our home. My brother John is 3 years younger than me, 32 years old, married, and has children, a daughter named Lily, and another son. John has a master's degree and is married with a job, but it's not a stable one. He works for 3 or 4 months and then rests. He too has had his share of struggles. And I have another younger brother named Elias, who is 15 years old and still in school. My father's name is William. He is a man of great character, and he worked in the health sector, specifically in the Union. This hospital that we are moving into is located in the city of Casablanca. It's the first hospital ever built in Casablanca. After it was decommissioned, the building remained but was converted into a house. It no longer serves as a hospital. I later learned that the floor we were living on used to be dedicated to childbirth and maternity. Many women and their babies died there during childbirth, and countless abortions were performed. There was widespread corruption among the staff, doctors, nurses, and general workers. The doctors were corrupt, resulting in the tragic deaths of many poor souls, including countless infants. All of this, we were unaware of at first. We were simply excited to move into this new place. We were not the only ones given a place in the building. Other union workers were also given spaces to live. So, don't imagine we were living among patients or in a functional hospital. The hospital had been decommissioned and cleaned by the government, and now it was just an old building with residents living in it. Despite its age, living there was quite nice. We were happy to move because it was centrally located, close to my siblings' schools and other conveniences. For about a week, everything seemed fine, even though my father was a bit unwell. It's worth noting that my brother John also lived with us in that large house, along with his wife and children, his daughter Lily and his son Alex. Additionally, my grandmother used to visit us occasionally. At that time, I had a modest job, which I won't specify to maintain privacy. One day, I fell seriously ill and couldn't leave the house. Despite consulting several doctors, none of the medications they prescribed made any difference. I couldn't even manage to go down the stairs to leave the house. So, I stayed home all the time, and that's when the strange events that would disrupt our lives began to unfold. As I mentioned earlier, we were living in this former hospital, which had a history of terrible events. Our neighbors also faced many problems in their lives, which made me feel something strange was happening in our house. I had a large room with a spacious wooden wardrobe. While I was sleeping, I would suddenly wake up to the sound of someone running inside the wardrobe. The wardrobe was large, made of wood, and I would wake up to strange noises, like someone was running or moving inside it. Every time I checked the clock, it was around 2 a.m., the sounds of running and stopping continued, as if someone was playing inside the wardrobe. The wardrobe was so big that it had a ladder to reach the top shelves. However, I was too scared to open it, especially at 2 a.m. I started leaving the light on because I was too frightened. Over time, I couldn't sleep normally anymore. Instead of sleeping, I would sit at my computer, staying awake. The noises didn't happen every night, but came often enough to disturb me deeply. One day, I bought a small phone, just for calls, a tiny one like a Nokia. I was lying in my bed, under the mosquito net, playing with the new phone. I turned on the camera to see how it took pictures, testing the quality. I was taking one photo after another when my niece, Lily, who I mentioned earlier, walked in and saw me. She suggested transferring the pictures to the computer to see them better and to keep them as memories. So, that's what I did. She was sitting with me, holding the computer, looking at the pictures I took. She came across one particular photo and stared at it, then told me to look at it closely. At that moment, I began examining the picture carefully. We zoomed in and noticed a small child, a baby with a disproportionately large head and long arms, captured with me in the photo. I swear to you, brothers and sisters, that what you are hearing in this story is true. I wouldn't lie about something like this. The strange figure in the photo shocked us. I was alone in the house at the time, and there were no small children around. After some time, we dismissed it, thinking it might be a defect in the phone. But honestly, it was terrifying. A few days later, I went to my room, the one where I sleep. I started locking the door because of the strange occurrences, even though my family was at home. I had become very fearful. As they say, fear invites trouble. I turned on the light and sat with my computer, scrolling through social media. It was around 2:30 a.m. As I mentioned, I had trouble sleeping at night and stayed up late. About half an hour passed, and nothing unusual happened. Everything seemed normal until I noticed the door handle turning, as if someone was trying to open it. I could hear the sound of the handle moving. I thought maybe someone in the family needed something. But then I remembered the door was locked from the inside. I started paying close attention, realizing the door shouldn't open since it was locked. To my utter shock, the door slowly began to open. I saw a woman with long tangled hair, almost light red in color, standing there. She was wearing a white dress, which was torn and stained with blood. In that moment, I couldn't see her clearly because I was so terrified. She moved closer to me, and despite feeling weak and unable to move, I sensed her cold hands grabbing my shoulders, as if she wanted to lift me. Her face got closer to mine, and I saw her features in detail. Her eyes were like those of a cat but red, with a dark line running down the middle. I swear to you, brothers and sisters, her eyes were not human. Her teeth were like those of a beast. Her appearance was horrifying to the extreme. I was so scared that I wanted to start reciting verses from the Quran, but I couldn't because my tongue felt twisted and heavy, preventing me from speaking. I felt as if my tongue was going to be cut off. This woman, or whatever she was, tightened her grip on me, pressing harder and harder. I was paralyzed, unable to move or do anything. I thought of reciting Quranic verses in my mind, and that's what I did. I started reciting verses silently. It was the best option I could think of at that moment. After I began reciting, I felt the creature loosening its grip on me, and my tongue started to untie. I began reciting the Quran out loud, and I noticed the woman's features changing, as if she was frightened. She released me and I saw her stepping back slowly. I didn't stay in one place. I followed her while reciting the Quran, and she kept retreating. Little by little, I managed to get her out of the room. I continued reciting until she reached the stairs and started going down. I followed her, still reciting, and she seemed terrified. I managed to lead her out of the house. In front of the house there was a drain pipe coming from above, and she stopped near its opening. She said, "Leave me here, this is my place. Just leave me here." She repeated this sentence 3 times and then sat down by the drain pipe. I ran back upstairs, terrified by what had happened. That night, I stayed up all night, unable to sleep. From that night on, I began to see strange things. Before that, I only heard sounds. That night, I stayed up until morning. When I woke up, I didn't know whether to tell my family what I had seen or if they would think I was imagining things, so I kept quiet. The next night, I couldn't sleep in my room, so I lay down in the living room, pretending to watch TV. My father would wake up to pray Fajr, and I didn't want him to see me awake, so I pretended to be asleep. I heard him get up, perform his ablutions, and leave for the mosque. As soon as he left, I turned the TV back on. I was lying there watching TV when I heard the front door open. I thought, it can't be my father. He wouldn't finish his prayer that quickly. I got up quickly to see who it was. I left the TV on and walked towards the stairs. We had a staircase that allowed you to see anyone coming up from below. I was upstairs and saw a woman in a full white dress, like a bride's attire, coming up the stairs. She was exceptionally beautiful, with very fair skin and long, silky black hair. She was climbing the stairs slowly, and I was frozen in place. When she reached me, I saw her face clearly. It was the face of a neighbor's daughter, but not exactly her. This entity didn't mimic her features perfectly. The woman was very fair, unlike our neighbor, and was holding a small stick, dressed in a white dress with a veil. I asked her, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" She looked at me, pointed to where I had been sitting, and said, "I just want to sleep there." She then lay down in the place where I had been sitting, took off her shoes, and slipped them under the pillow. She lay on her side and turned her back to me. I was stunned watching this strange woman. I decided to lie down too, thinking it might be a neighbor or something harmless. I leaned against the wall, and after about 10 minutes, my father walked in and started shouting at me for leaving the TV on and not sleeping. I wanted to tell him to look at the woman lying there, but when I turned to point her out, she was gone. The spot where she had lain was empty. I was so scared that I couldn't speak and just remained silent. One night, my son turned off the TV and went to sleep. After that night, I was on the verge of losing my mind due to these frightening events, which seemed to only happen to me. One time, my grandmother, who sometimes visited us, was staying over. She was frail and couldn't move from her bed, so she used a wheelchair. She was sleeping in the room next to mine. I was asleep on my back when I suddenly opened my eyes and found her standing over me, despite her inability to get up on her own. It was as if she wanted to strangle me. My cousin saw this and warned me, saying, "Fatima, be careful." My father woke up, rushed over, and was shocked to see her standing over me. He called out to her, asking what she was doing there. My grandmother, who couldn't walk, started crawling away. My family helped her back to her bed. A similar incident happened with my brother, Abdelatif. I was asleep and woke up in the middle of the night to find him standing over me, pointing his finger at me with a menacing look. He didn't say anything, just kept pointing and staring at me like a madman. I turned on the light and started pulling him away. He seemed frozen in place, in a strange state. I managed to get him out of the room. For about a week, these incidents stopped, and I thought I was finally free from these nightmares. One night, I was sleeping in my bed with the mosquito net covering me. I was lying on my arm, and it hurt, so I turned to adjust it. Suddenly, I felt a presence behind me, even though the light was on. I froze in fear and saw nothing, but felt something behind me. It was as if something had merged into the wall. The presence had hairy arms and was pressing on me. That night, I couldn't sleep. The next morning, I told my father everything that had been happening to me between 2 and 3 in the morning. I expected a comforting response, but he didn't believe me. He said I was imagining things because I wasn't praying. One day my aunt visited us. She slept with my mother in one room. In the middle of the night, she woke up and saw a tall man wearing polka-dotted pajamas coming towards her. He had soft, straight hair and was holding medical instruments like those used by doctors to check heartbeats. He approached her, and she was terrified. She covered her head and tried to wake my mother, who was sleeping next to her, calling out, "Aisha, wake up!" My mother, however, was in a deep sleep, as if something was holding her down. My aunt kept trying to wake her until she felt a tug on the blanket she was using to cover herself. When she looked, she saw the same baby boy that I and Yusra, my niece, had seen in the photo. She recognized him from my description, a small baby with a big head and long fingers. My aunt was so scared she ran to my room, waking me up. These events had been happening to me for a while, making it difficult to sleep. One night, I woke up to the sound of someone knocking on my door. #continued story. That night, my brother Abdelatif had another unsettling experience in the same house where my aunt and mother had been. He was sleeping next to the same man that my aunt had seen. My aunt said she saw him coming out of the toilet, the same man who had been seen before. This man would always come out of the toilet and then stand by the mosquito net where Abdelatif and his wife were sleeping. She tried to wake Abdelatif, but he wouldn't wake up, just like what happened to my mother. The man stood next to Abdelatif all night, staring at him from the side, and remained there until dawn. As soon as it was morning, he would go back to the toilet. It became clear that this was not just something I was experiencing, it affected the entire family. My cousin saw the same tall man with soft hair one day when she was visiting us. She screamed, "Turn on the light! Turn on the light!" We all woke up in a panic, and I quickly turned on the light. She described seeing the same man we had all seen before, standing and staring at her. This was when we realized that something truly sinister was happening in our home. Once we understood the truth, the problems in our house escalated. The entity seemed intent on causing conflict among us. The arguments grew more intense and violent. My brother even threatened us with a knife on several occasions, creating an atmosphere of fear and hostility. The presence in the house was not just causing discord, it was actively trying to pit us against each other. The disturbances in our house seemed to be tied to an entity that wanted to cause chaos. Sometimes, the entity would take on the appearance of a family member, creating even more confusion. My brother, who had been seeing the entity, began to behave erratically. He would often come home from work and act as if he was in a trance, which made us question if he was possessed or if he was just extremely disturbed. One night, I was particularly exhausted. My brother, who was supposed to be on duty, came home and seemed to be carrying the same strange presence with him. Despite being extremely tired, I noticed him acting unusually. My father, who had been away for work, was not there to provide support or answers. His absence made the situation even more difficult. My father usually performed night prayers and read the Quran before dawn, but on this particular night, he didn't. I stayed up late, and when I went to check on him, I found him asleep, looking pale and unwell. It seemed like his illness had worsened. I left him to rest and went to a family gathering alone, where I brought back some food and refreshments for him. When I gave him the food, he looked at me and said, "Fatima, what you're experiencing in the house is because they want the blood. They need blood in the house. They are the ones causing all the trouble for you and your siblings. If we don't give them what they want, they'll continue to torment us." I was shocked and asked him if he had seen anything. He told me not to ask about what he had seen. All he said was that we needed to sacrifice a lamb and spread its blood throughout the house, including the toilets and all the rooms, to cleanse the place. I consulted a religious scholar who confirmed that this was a common practice mentioned in religious texts. Following the advice, my father brought a lamb and sacrificed it. We spread its blood throughout the house as instructed. This act seemed to calm the disturbances for a while. The house was quieter, but the memory of those haunting experiences stayed with us. The family tensions eventually subsided, but the fear of those strange occurrences lingered for a long time. #continued story. Since the day of the sacrifice, we didn't experience any disturbances for 3 years. It was as if the entity had left the house. We didn't see anything unusual during that time. However, after the death of my father, may he rest in peace, things changed. I want everyone to pray for the soul of my father and ask for mercy for him. After my father passed away, the disturbances returned. We began experiencing similar occurrences, feeling someone pulling at our legs while we slept, or hearing and seeing figures like the tall man and the women in black. I even saw a woman dressed in black, who appeared in the doorway, and my cousin confirmed she had seen her too before she vanished. My mother, while cooking, saw a woman in a beige robe and felt terrified, unable to move. This recurring fear made our lives increasingly difficult. The disturbances became even more pronounced after my father's death, leading us to believe that something had changed in the house. The situation worsened to the point that the entire family was affected. Neighbors even started reporting similar sightings. Children saw the same figures, including the small boy and the man with the soft hair. This presence of the supernatural in our lives was overwhelming. In response, we decided to leave the cursed house and move in with my aunt. We hoped that by doing so, we could resolve the issues and decide whether to rent or buy another place. The family gathered to discuss the matter, and everyone agreed except for my brother Abdulatif. Despite having a master's degree and being married, he refused to leave the house and insisted on staying. We moved out, and Abdulatif and his family stayed behind. Over time, Abdulatif's situation deteriorated. He lost his job and began walking down a troubling path. We were concerned about his well-being but respected his decision. Once we left the house, my mother, my younger brother, and I felt a sense of relief. We were free from the disturbances caused by the supernatural beings that plagued us in the old house. Abdulatif, however, continued to live there despite the adverse effects on his life. He experienced hardships, and his life took a turn for the worse. We occasionally visited him, but it was clear that the house had a negative impact on him. From my experience, I hope others learn from our story. Before moving into a new home, it's important to investigate its history thoroughly, beyond just asking a real estate agent. Knowledge and caution can prevent such haunting experiences from affecting your life. This concludes the story that has been part of our lives for nearly 12 years. Thankfully, things have improved since we left that house, and I hope this story serves as a cautionary tale for others.